are? What makes you tick?
Being a good mom is very important to me, and a good wife, and a good worker, and being all those things together is not easy. So I'm basically a ticking time bomb.
I tried to find the human in Lori Vallow for this case, because that's what I do. I'm not content just hearing this evil woman killed her kids. I need to know why. And the Lori Vallow case is incredibly complicated. But the very first place that I found Lori to possibly be a human being was in 2018. She was on her 4th marriage. Okay, I gotta say, Lori was a devout religious person, and she had no problem walking away from love and getting a divorce. This can be extremely frowned upon in the community, and so to be honest, this shows that Lori is dedicated to her religion, but she is willing to do things righteously and walk away if it doesn't work out. But this also tells me Lori loves love. Okay? You don't dive into 4 different marriages looking for fulfillment and happiness and trying to feel it all if you're not a person that loves love. Otherwise, you just sit back and remain non-committal. But she was trying, and I get that because a lot of us, that's what we want. We're looking for a big love. But Lori wasn't just looking for a big love. All of her other relationships didn't work out for a couple of different reasons. You know, maybe they met at the wrong time, maybe it was an impulsive marriage, maybe they just kind of grew apart. But there was actually one underlying reason why Lori's marriages weren't working out. You remember I said before that she was a devout religious woman. Well, that was a big part of it. Lori Vallow was looking for a spiritual equal, a spiritual warrior of sorts, somebody that could match her level of religious conviction. And she just wasn't finding it with her past husbands. I mean, it was like after the love kind of wore off and the general excitement, she was just left in a marriage with somebody that didn't love God as much as she did, and sometimes judged the way that she would talk about them. And then one day in 2018, Lori gets invited to this religious conference in Utah with 2 of her friends. And that's when she sees him. There's this guy standing up front, and he's talking about God and belief, and I mean, it's just beautiful, and he speaks with so much conviction. It's almost like there's this bright white light surrounding him. And Lori knows this is him. This is my spiritual equal. And not only that, but this man knows something. He knows something dark. The end of the world is coming, and only 144,000 of God's most loyal servants will be taken up into the kingdom. And he knows when it's happening, and he knows how to get there. And he will be exalted. And Lori, by God, she is coming with him. Welcome back. It's another week, another Sinister. And it's me, your host, BOZE. I'm here. I know, BOZE, don't sound too excited. I'm here every Friday. Now, we were here before on Mondays, but now the body cam videos come out on the 2nd channel on Mondays, so I'm here with you on Friday. Yay. A little switch up, but don't forget the live streams and the body cam videos still happen on Mondays, so you have lots of festivities. Now, you've got something for your Friday. Sinister. I just want to mention before we hop in, you've probably heard of the Lori Vallow case before, and if you're anything like me, you were probably very confused through the whole thing. What I found when I was researching, I watched a couple of documentaries, and a lot of them came out in 2020, 2021, before we even went to trial. This case was so salacious because Lori Vallow was a pretty woman that murdered her kids, and it was like, okay, why? I feel like the media really focused on the salaciousness of it or the craziness of it, and they really built up this story rather than really explaining why. So when I was watching documentaries on this case, 1, they were very confusing because of the way the story was revealed, and 2, not all of the information was out yet. So I am now bringing this to you after watching hours and hours of multiple documentaries on the case, some of which were convoluted and had no new information. I also had to listen to one of Chad Daybell's books, narrated by his own family member, monotonously, because I was just not okay with what the media headlines put in front of me about this case, and I needed more information. And you know what? I feel like I understand this case a little bit more now. Lori, who was originally born Lori Noreen Cox, was born to parents Janice and Barry Cox on June 26, 1973, in a city in San Bernardino, California. Now, her mother Janice can be seen in a lot of specials and a lot of documentaries about Lori. We'll talk a little bit more about Janice's demeanor and the ways that she defended Lori and then later switched up, but I kind of wanted to point out one thing about Janice is her appearance. Janice is a much older woman that seems to care a lot about her appearance. When you see her in documentaries, you know, she doesn't just have her hair bleached or dyed and, you know, has a little bit of makeup on for the documentary. Like, no, she is tanned. She has on sparkly makeup. She's got her hair freshly, like just everything. When you look at her, you can tell this is a woman that cares very, very much about her appearance, has a specific type of style, and has cared about her appearance her entire life. I mention this because this is the woman that raised Lori, and even though we don't have too much information from this, it was just something I noticed in all of the documentaries that I couldn't unsee. So Lori was the second youngest out of 5 kids, and she was raised in a very, very, very religious home. Her family was in the Latter-day Saints, and they lived in California, but, you know, they were practicing, had family in Utah, would occasionally travel over there. But the big thing about Lori, and I thought this was so interesting, was Lori was not going to church just once a week, not just twice a week for, you know, a little Bible study or something. She was going every single day before school. So she would have her normal day where she went to church with her family, but she also was going to religious education classes in the morning before school every single day, Monday through Friday. Now, look, this is actually a common practice for Mormon children. It's called seminary, but I want you to get a picture of how much religion took center stage in her life. Lori's entire life was God and the church. A lot of kids, I'm somebody that has a bit of religious trauma, and I just went to church 2, maybe 3 times a week. But like clockwork, week over week, this girl was talking about religion at minimum 30 hours a week. 30 hours a week. And that doesn't even include, you know, when she goes home and her family sits around and says, let's all read the Book of Mormon together and like have a couple scriptures and some tea. You know what I mean? Like, she is constantly soaking up this information. Now, I know this is a pretty generic thing to say in true crime, but I actually believe this to be true. People said Lori was a pretty happy kid and she had a happy childhood. Like, there are people that have memories of her when she was much younger because she seemed to build some meaningful connections with people, or people remembered her, right? One of her friends, Flores, said she had us laughing hysterically all the time. I just always thought she was kind of a Barbie doll. She was just really, really friendly, not overly friendly, really sweet, just normal, and I always felt excited to get to know her. Like, that is how people remember Lori when she was a kid. She did, however, get pretty good grades, and she was involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. She was a flyer with the cheerleaders, like, you know, the person that they lift up that's kind of like light and, I'm here. You know, that was Lori. Now, another thing is, part of the reason why Lori was so happy was because religion was her glue. Religion was her you can do no wrong. A lot of kids, when they're younger, they're armed with this knowledge of, hey, you're religious now. You want to get into heaven. That's the big goal. So while you're on earth, be nice, be loyal to God, and then you will go to heaven. So for somebody like Lori that is going to religious education school every single day, religion is her world. All she cares about is God. All she cares about is she has this, like, the schematic of honor him, worship him, go to school, go to cheerleading, and everything will be okay. This is Lori Cox, okay? Lori Cox's entire personality is, I am here to serve God and you. Whatever you need, I can do it. Like, that's who she is, okay? And she does it with a smile. She was just here to do a good job, and I'm here wherever you need me. Like, it kind of feels like there's times where there's like nothing between the ears, but I mean, there is something between the ears, and it's God. It's God and good grades. And like, that is who she is. If you tell her, do XYZ and I'll consider you a good person, Lori Vallow is gonna do XYZ. That's just who she was. Summer's almost over, but listen, it's not the only time that you get body odor, and it's not the only time that you want to stay clean and smelling nice. Lumi can help. Did you guys know that their formula provides 72 hours of protection? 72 hours of protection. That's what you're getting from Lumi. It's a pH balancing deodorant that keeps you covered all day long and a little bit more. Lumi is a whole body deodorant, so you can use it on your pits, you can use it on your privates, you can use it wherever you want. You put it on your feet, you can use it from the soles to the face, whatever you want to do. Lumi has got you. And guess what? You're going to be smelling nicer than ever. We got pumpkin spice, we got lavender, we got cinnamon, freshly picked apples. These are scents for Lumi, of course. Lumi's not just for making you smell good and keeping that odor protection all day. It's also for keeping your pits drier, okay? Everything is about to be sealed up if you put this stick on your body. And look, if you don't know where to start, well, let's start with the starter pack. This thing has solid stick deodorant, a cream tube deodorant, and 2 free products of your choice, like a mini body wash or the deodorant wipes. Those are useful. I like those. Now, the starter pack is already discounted, but if you use the code for 15% off that I'm about to give you, you can actually stack it on top of the starter pack. If you want to try Lumi today and give it a shot, just use the code SINISTER at checkout for 15% on top of your starter pack if that's where you want to go first. That's LUMEDEODORANT. Enter the code SINISTER at LumiDeodorant.com for 15% off your purchase. Up until this point, Lori is just going to school, getting her good grades, going to cheer practice, going to church, going to her religious studies. And I'm Lori, where do you need me? That's just how she is the whole time. Until her senior year, when Lori Vallow ends up tasting the forbidden fruit. That's right, she got her first boyfriend in her senior year. Now, this is interesting because it also lends the credence to my theory that Lori is just here to be a good girl because they told her, you know, you ain't having sex before marriage. You don't need to be dating nobody. You don't need to, who do you need to date? God, G-O-D, Jesus. He's number one, the savior, the man, right? This is how she was raised. She wasn't even looking at guys until she was a senior in high school. And the other thing is, Lori was kind of a baddie. She was a little cutie, you know, she's blonde, she's got pretty facial features, but she was not looking at any of these guys. And suddenly, in her senior year, she not only gets her first boyfriend, but she falls in love. And this is Lori's first big love. And there's many more to come. But this one was serious. She and Nelson Yanes dated from the early 90s and ended up getting married in 1992. But one big problem. He was not of the faith. And Lori didn't really like to talk about her. When she brought Nelson around her family members, they immediately knew, like, that boy is not Mormon. Like, what are you doing? I mean, he's not a Latter-day Saint. He's not a Mormon. Is he even religious? This is really, really interesting because Lori was such a devout Latter-day Saint. And not only did she bring home a boy who is not of the religion, but she didn't seem to care. And this is just kind of the first break that I see in Lori's character, almost that she is willing to sacrifice her morals for a guy. Now, is it a problem for somebody that is religious to date somebody that's non-denominational or not religious? That's fine with me. But for her and her family, this is odd. Regardless, she and Nelson marry in 1992. But the marriage quickly falls apart because he's not Mormon. That's actually what the big thing was. Nelson was not. He was just a guy. But the relationship ended up fizzling out and they divorced and had no children. So next, Lori gets married to her second husband in 1995, just a couple of years later. She has her first child out of this marriage. It's her son named Colby. And, you know, Colby actually said to later, quote, It was a genuinely bad marriage, and that's all he had to say about it. So she ends up divorcing her second husband shortly after they got married. But in 2001, she is right back at the altar, ladies and gentlemen. Then she ends up marrying a guy named Joseph Ryan in 2001. This is just 6 years after her second marriage. And this one also, total disaster. This third marriage is when Lori actually has her first daughter, Tylee. And Tylee was only 3 years old when they divorced in 2004. Lori is in and out of these relationships, but one of the biggest priorities to her was being a good mom. And I know that's shocking for me to say what happened, but what we are looking for here is what is the turning point, okay? Her son, Colby, also said this guy was a piece of trash. Her second husband was also abusive to her. And you know what? Yeah, Nelson wasn't a Mormon. I think that Lori would fall for these men hard and fast. She didn't start dating until she was a senior. She didn't realize how good attention from these guys felt. But then when the relationship fails, she just copes by retreating deeper into her faith. Now, I think this is a good time to let you know some of the information that I picked up during the interviews with her family. When I'm diving into a case, we collect all of our research, which, by the way, the research packet on this is 42 pages long. What I also do is I read as many court documents, I watch court videos because I like to see people's demeanor, and what I also do is I watch documentaries about the case. Now, I want to be very, very clear. I do not use any storylines or anything particularly that are from documentaries because Netflix and whatever else, they sometimes like to fudge things to make a story. However, these documentaries, whether they come from Netflix or Discovery ID, they often have exclusive interviews with people that process the crime scene, people in the judicial system that worked on the case, or very often family members. So even though the storytelling in a lot of these documentaries are not what I'm going to take as gospel, I do take the family members' words as truth. And what I found while looking into the Lori cases, people thought that Lori was delusional. So let's just pause for a second. It's 2005. Lori has 2 children, Colby and Tylee, and she's just gotten out of her third marriage. She's 3 times divorced, somewhere in her 30s at this point. There was a moment in the documentary where Lori's mother starts to talk about how Lori was exhibiting some strange behaviors. Now, her mother is extremely religious, okay? But even Janice was noticing that some of Lori's beliefs were extreme. It was almost like when she got really stressed or upset, she would just go into this loopy, childlike, well, God is just going to save everything and the Lord, and everything's going to be fine. And it's like she would get stressed and then just start talking about God happily. Like it was the one thing that made her feel better. And here's the thing. For Lori, for anybody, God is real. Yeah, this is great. We want to go to heaven. Everything's amazing. A delusion is when we accept a thing that is not real as fact because that thing makes us feel good. Okay? Oftentimes, people accept delusions because the delusion makes them feel good. And so for Lori, she kind of begins to slip into no longer just faith and perseverance. She's slipping into delusion, religious delusion, when she gets stressed out because her background tells her, well, follow God and all will be okay. So no matter what the issue is, Lori goes back to God. But God can't always fix everything. Sometimes you have to fix things. If your third husband is like abusive physically and sexually to you and your children, you cannot just pray this away. You have to do something. And so if Lori is dealing with the severe psychological stress of realizing, oh my God, I have married a sexual abuser, her brain just short circuits and says, go with God. And she actually doesn't even know what to do. I'm actually going to say that this is the first part of maybe turning our empathy cap down a little bit, because I believe that religion was spoon-fed to Lori and she can't help certain delusions. However, if you are of sound mind that you can divorce the abusers and say, oh my God, they did it, there's some disconnect happening when you just fall immediately to religion. And if other people are watching this and saying that you're a little loopy, then you got to do something about it. You know, you got like she was just on the brink of reality, and it's like she like lost it because it was all too much for her. So in the documentary, her mom actually describes a moment where Lori was acting so weird that they actually got her 5150 and they took her in and they interviewed her and they said, okay, well, she's saying some religious stuff, but like, you know, that's about God, so that's fine. And then also, I really think this was a big factor. Lori was pretty, so they let her go. These people actually came and picked her up after her mother was like, she needs to be treated or she needs to be looked at. And they talked to her and they were like, sounds like everything's fine. You can go home now. And the shock that was on her mom's face when they let her go makes me wonder, what kind of delusional religious stuff was Lori saying that even Janice, a fellow, you know, hardcore religious person, was like, you need to go talk to somebody. And two, I think it's really interesting that she was so shocked that Lori came home that same day. There's also a later clip where Tylee is a little bit older when she's actually talking to the police in the body cam footage, and her mom says something and Tylee goes, you're delusional. So I'm saying all of this to say around 2005 is when people really started to notice that Lori was becoming a religious fanatic that would deal with any extremely stressful problems by just falling into the world of God and not doing anything else about it. And people were concerned. Now, this will start to happen a bit more from 2005 on, but I want you to be mindful that from 2005 on, Lori is having these religious delusional episodes. And everybody is watching, but they don't know what to do because she's a good mom that's pretty. I mean, truly, that's why. So right after the divorce in about 2004, same time that I'm saying these delusional things happened around 2005, Lori decides she's going to be a little brand new and she competes in a beauty pageant. And Lori is up on stage, honestly, looking great, strutting her stuff, doing her thing. She's got a bikini body. She's smiling. She looks like a pageant girl. But there's one moment in her pageant interview that is not only very strange, but it's foreshadowing of what happens next.
Being a good mom is very important to me, and a good wife and a good worker, and being all those things together is not easy. So I'm basically a ticking time bomb.
Yes, she actually said that. Deep down inside, it sounds like Lori may have known that things were not okay, but sometimes people say things and they really don't know how much they're struggling. So after this, she also ends up appearing on Wheel of Fortune. And while she's on the show, her play is very, very interesting. I actually watched the whole clip. She starts to guess the letters on the screen, and it's very obvious at a point she's got a long puzzle to solve, and every time she spins, she hits for a certain amount of dollars, and she already clearly knows the word because she's guessing every letter to try to up her bank to make more money. This is a smart Wheel of Fortune tactic, but at one point the host actually says to her like, Lori, are you sure you want to keep spinning? Because, you know, you could go bankrupt at any point. And she said, well, I didn't have any money when I got here, so... I'm not even kidding. That's exactly how she says it too.
I had no money anyway.
Well, okay, then lift the darn thing up. Oh my.
So through these actions, Lori is like telling us a couple of things. She has ended her relationship and she's looking for her confidence again, kind of finds it in the beauty pageant. And, you know, she's also looking for maybe a little attention, a little cash. She's looking for something new, okay? She throws herself into beauty pageants and TV right after her third marriage. Like, she's looking for something for her, I think. But there's always something out there for Lori on the field, and that's men. And in 2006, she gets married to her husband, Charles Vallow. That's where she gets the name, in 2006. He was a businessman, pretty well off, and this was actually her longest marriage. This marriage lasted for 13 years. Now, Charles was much older than her. In fact, he was 17 years her senior. But that seemed to work for Lori. She didn't have complaints about Charles towards herself, the kids, or anything, and it was her longest relationship to date. Now, even though this is Lori's, quote, most successful marriage because it had the longest duration, it was not without issues. But before we get into the next part here, I want to just kind of bring back that disclaimer that I mentioned before. I've said before that when the media covered the Lori Vallow case, which you may have heard before, it was very confusing. It was convoluted. That's because, in my opinion, the way that the story has been told was without all of the pieces. They started covering the Lori Vallow case in 2020 before everything came out in the trial, and so things were not told in chronological order. They were actually told in the order that the evidence was generally found, which I believe makes the story really convoluted. So, for the rest of this podcast, I'm going to tell you things as they happened rather than just when they were revealed, and it will help you understand the timeline of events a little bit better. I'm just giving you that warning because if you've heard this before, you might realize this is laid out a little bit differently, but that's because they were releasing the information before the whole timeline was actually available. Do you know the ultimate sampler pack from IQ Bar is the best way to get started with their products? Let me tell you what you get. 7 IQ bars, 4 IQ mix sticks, and then 4 IQ Joe sticks, okay? And what is that? You get your bar, you get your sustenance, right? You get your IQ mix, which can be like electrolytes or anything keeping you hydrated through the day. And oh my God, don't even get me started on the IQ Joes. Smooth energy all day and a coffee taste to wake you up in the morning. How could you go wrong? Now listen, I'm gonna give you a discount at the end for the sampler package, but let me tell you a little bit more about IQ. IQ bars have 9 satisfying flavors. And also, listen, more fiber. Less sugar, less carbohydrates than alternatives. Take a look at the nutrition. Maybe it's perfect just for you. I know some of you are very particular. But if you're just looking for something to get you started in the morning, try an IQ bar. Put it in your mouth. Girl, you could be having a full IQ morning. You could have your IQ bar and then wash it down with some electrolyte mix. And then, right after that, you need a little bit of energy? You need a little bit more? Try the IQ Joe. You could have all of these back to back, boom, 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 all in 30 minutes and start your day right. Listen, like you think that this is just an ad, but I want you to think about it. Having a low carb, low sugar treat first thing in the morning, some electrolytes, you weren't going to drink no water anyways. And then on top of that, you got a little coffee and caffeine. Tell me that isn't everything you need in the morning. It's everything you need. And guess what? It's all right in the sampler pack. So let's just go ahead and do this. If you want to get 20% off, IQ Bar's a little bit different. You got to shoot them a little text message, okay? But it's super simple. You text the word SINISTER to 64000. It's that easy. Also, did I mention you get free shipping? Free shipping too. So that's SINISTER to 64,000. So like I said, this is Lori's longest marriage, 13 years. But a couple of things happen over the course of the marriage that I think are pretty important. So one, things seemed to be pretty good in the beginning, but there were some family issues. One thing was that Lori, after her divorce with her third husband, she ends up telling her brother, a man named Alex, that her husband assaulted her child, Tylee. Remember I said that Lori was kind of the baby sister out of 5 siblings? Well, Alex is the big brother. And not only is he the big brother, but he's the big uncle. So when he hears that Tylee had been assaulted, Alex gets pissed and he comes after the guy. In 2007, he was actually arrested for attacking Joseph Ryan. Now, mind you, Lori is married to her new husband, Charles Vallow, at this point. This is how she got the name. But when they're revisiting the previous marriage, this detail comes out and Lori's brother is extremely upset. And I get that. I totally get that. That's his nephew. That's his baby sister. Like, this guy is pissed. During this assault, the brother actually tased Joseph, Lori's ex-husband, and Joseph immediately called his lawyer. Alex pled guilty to aggravated assault, and then he served 3 months in jail. Now, because this arrest happened, there are actually court documents. And in the court documents, it says, quote, Tylee was being pushed by her mother to make an outcry, which Tylee later recanted. The ball is really in your court because let me just break down a couple of family dynamics. Reminder, the third husband is Tylee's biological father. Also, Tylee was under the age of 5 when these things supposedly happened. Now, you can say maybe she felt remorse making a statement against her biological father. Or Maybe she knew it happened and Tylee didn't remember, and so she pushed her to make these statements. But regardless, Tylee did later recant, and Joseph has denied all of the abuse allegations. So this is all happening during her fourth marriage to Charles. So he's kind of just watching it happen. And also, he sees how crazy Lori's brother is. He's not the spiritual warrior that Lori is looking for, but he's stable. He supports her. He's financially well off. And, he's got a kind soul. Now, family drama aside, there were some happy parts of the relationship. For example, Lori and Charles actually ended up adopting JJ, who was Charles's great nephew. His name was Joshua JJ Jackson. JJ was autistic and needed a bit of support, and not only were Lori and Charles there for him, but also Tylee. This is a huge part of the Vallow case that I remember. The number of home movies where Tylee was very protective of JJ, literally saying, "This is my little brother," like back up, there was this warmth. She knew JJ had the sweetest soul, and she knew he needed a little bit of support. And this was not her adoptive cousin, second, twice removed or something. To Tylee, JJ was pretty much her little brother. In fact, when all the reports came out about this case, JJ was Lori's child. Tylee was Lori's child. These are children that she is supposed to take care of. They look to her like a mother. I mean, of course, Tylee was actually her kid, but they operated as a family unit. I'm going to tell you later in this story that Lori Vallow killed JJ, a child that could not defend himself and never deserved any harm coming to him. But I want to remind you that even though JJ is not Lori's biological child, JJ lived in her home for many years. She put him to bed at night. She took care of him when he needed something. She made him breakfast every morning. She saw him every day. She sent him off to school. By all accounts, this was the closest thing that JJ had to a mother. So if for any reason hearing that JJ was not Lori's biological child changes anything for you, it really shouldn't. She had a responsibility to take care of this child when she adopted him, and he lived there like she was his mother. Now, yes, this was Lori's longest standing relationship, but to be honest, she didn't find exactly what she was looking for in Charles. She was still looking for that spiritual equal, that God warrior, that person that was gonna ride into the holy heavens with her. And you know what? She realized maybe it's not Charles, but he's a good guy and we've got a good home. And she needed a little bit more. She needed a little bit more fire to her religion because this was the most important thing in Lori's life. So she started a podcast. This podcast was on the Preparing a People network, and it was hosted by Lori and her best friend, a woman named Melanie Gibb. This is a spiritual extremism podcast. That is straight up what it is. If I can just chime in here for a minute with my Christian roots, which I do all the time. I talk about a lot of cases with female killers and religious killers, okay? That is just what I do. In this podcast, they talk a lot about concepts that don't seem very godlike to me. They talk about evil energy. They talk about spiritual prisons. They're using a lot of terminology that actually strikes me as pretty new agey. We have gone past reading the scripture, okay? Look, God said, go to heaven, read the Bible, be a good person. They started bleeding in this delusion, this religious extremism, these new age concepts. And to me, honestly, a lot of new age concepts are based in overcoming trauma and having this energetic kind of past that is still haunting you. And the problem is, in religion, we just don't respect mental health. It is actually shocking to me that they even 5150'd Lori at some point, because in extreme religious communities, we're like, oh, she's just praising God and it's okay. The things that Lori was saying on this podcast, honestly, to me, are not even godlike. But the question is, why are they doing this? Why are they diving into these extreme religious concepts? It's because it feels good to them. Delusion feels good to certain people. It is the most horrifying thing for an external person to witness that is not in that world. But the reason why people cling on to delusion is because it feels good. So when Lori is doing all of this, honestly, not even Mormon, very like new age babble under the guise of, being a Latter-day Saint and being more spiritually connected. First of all, she's absolutely lost it. Second of all, this was a really scary podcast for some people to listen to. Her husband, Charles Vallow, after being married to her for 19 years, was like, I cannot even listen to this because I'm a little creeped out. When Lori was running around the house saying random delusional stuff, like how Tylee would comment on it or on how Charles would comment on it, because everybody else in the room wasn't down with her delusions, it kind of stayed caged. Like she might say something and then go off into La La Land or whatever. Now she has created an echo chamber for her delusions with a weekly schedule and other participants. So this means the delusion is going to grow. They are fanning the flames. And every week they're sitting down in this podcast, feeling important, feeling enlightened, feeling closer to God, and feeling like they are doing the Lord's work. But in reality, we are a commune of people bonded together by delusion and spiritual fanaticism. That's what it is. This podcast is a pivotal moment in her life, okay? Because we have gone from her saying a few things in church and people being like, okay, Lori, to her saying a few things in the home and people being like, okay, Lori. Now she's got a podcast. I listened to this podcast a little bit, and I think what was probably the most shocking part about it, other than the spiritual demons conversation, wherever they were recording, this person had multiple pets, a bird, and a dog. And through the entire podcast, while Lori is just me, you just hear this parrot and this bird just going on and on and on in the background. Can y'all imagine if I was doing Sinister and I had a bird right here, a dog right here, and a really energetic cat over here, and I just kept talking and you were supposed to listen? That's what their podcast was like. So, to do an audio show with a dog and a parrot going off in the background, are you enlightened? Are you? Now, you remember I told you this podcast was on the Preparing a People Network, which, by the way, terrifying name to me. Like, I come from Christianity, and preparing a people, that don't sound Christ-like to me. Because you know what? You are not supposed to assemble the mission yourself, okay? You are supposed to wait for God. Y'all are supposed to wait. So the art for this is like a Spartan warrior that is getting ready to fight for God. God ain't asked you to go to war. He ain't asked you to go to war. And they are out here, spiritual warriors. You know what this is giving? This is giving people that are extremely traumatized, but they're not allowed to acknowledge their trauma because maybe the trauma came from the church, or the church doesn't believe in trauma or mental health. So they have to rationalize it with these new age concepts like spiritual demons, rather than this person's a fucking narcissist. Like, their podcast is this weird combination of mental health that nobody's allowed to talk about using new age terms and religion. I think they're really talking about their mental health issues, but they can't do it. So they do it under the guise of religion, and it ends up turning into the craziest podcast you've ever heard. So you remember I said that this was on the Preparing a People Network. Well, guess what? It's time for the Preparing a People Conference, and that is exactly where Lori and her friends go to find fellow spiritual warriors that are also fans of their podcast and connect with God. So, in 2018, Lori goes to the convention with her friend Melanie. On one of the days, she ends up going to a panel where this guy was speaking. He was an author. He wrote apocalyptic religious military novels. Now, he wasn't a New York Times bestseller, but he was on stage and everyone was listening. He introduced himself and his name was Chad Daybell. And Chad was up there talking about his books, talking about his beliefs, and talking about everything. And there's a moment where Lori's listening to this guy, and I can only imagine that him talking just slowly turned into womp, 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 because Lori's eyes lit up. This was her man. This was her God warrior. Oh my God. He's here. He has finally been sent. Now remember, Lori has been married 4 times. She is not afraid of divorce and she's not afraid of love. And with Chad Daybell, it was practically love at first sight. Lori went up and introduced herself right away to Chad. Now, if you're listening on audio, you may not know what Chad and Lori look like. I implore you to look it up. But let me give you a little bit of a description. Chad Daybell is a frumpy man with an interesting head shape. That's the best way I can describe it. It's like his head shape is like a rectangle inside of a rectangle inside of a rectangle. He has the most textbook military buzz cut I've ever seen in my life. Like even the length that I'm looking at in this photo, I'm like, holy shit, that's a military buzz cut. He's got nice teeth. Other than that, he kind of just looks like a sad pastor. He's giving sad pastor vibes. Or you know what? He dresses like a pastor, but he doesn't have the conviction in him to be a pastor. I'm actually seeing more like Usher here, maybe Usher. Okay. And then Lori, disclaimer, she's a fucking monster, but she's a pretty woman. So I'm going to use that description because I'm making a point here. Lori is an older woman that takes really good care of herself, okay? Most people in California or Utah, they would look at her and say, that is a very pretty lady. She's got blonde hair that's dyed pretty well, touched up. It's got nice layers in it. She's got pretty teeth. She's got a little shimmery pink lipstick on. She's got blue eyes, a little mascara. All of her facial features are all in the right place. Got a little Botox, a little something done, but Lori's taking care of herself. I'm going to make some assumptions here, but walk with me. So when these two people meet at the Preparing a People conference, Lori is going into it like, oh, I like you. And Chad is looking at her like, are you talking to me? This man can't believe this pretty woman is talking to him. Okay. And this is really, really, really important. I know here, I don't want to call a murderer pretty. I don't want to call a child killer pretty, but I have to for the context of the story because I think it plays a major role into it. People at the conference said, including Lori's best friend Melanie, that she was flirting with Chad. When she walked up, she was not just inquiring about the book. She was flirting. And Chad, he's actually married. But also, you want to talk to me right now? It's, oh my gosh, tell me more about your book. I want to know more. And he's like, well, yeah. So what is Chad going to do in this moment? He's going to put it on. He's going to put on the confidence. You know, this woman has approached him. She's clearly interested. He's down. He almost can't even believe this is happening. This doesn't sound very Christ-like to me. This doesn't sound like a religious conference when 2 married people are walking up to each other, trying to figure out what each other's genitals look like. That's not very Christ-like to me. Also, Spotify listeners, nothing has changed. Rate the podcast 5 stars. But if you're watching on YouTube, yes, this is day 2. I had to turn the lights on for my own sanity. It was very spooky in the beginning. I hope it felt spooky. Okay, so before we get to these 2 adulterers, who is Chad Daybell? And more specifically, who is Chad Guy Daybell? That's right. His full legal name is Chad Guy Daybell. This is particularly funny because in American culture, the names Chad and Guy are used interchangeably to describe a kind of douchey jock guy. And that is exactly the opposite of who Chad was. In this case, I stumbled on this news article that was from a very reputable source, and it says, from an early age, Chad was into apocalyptic thinking. Many of his writings were fixated on the idea of life and death. And I thought this was really interesting because I don't think most children are just born into the world like, when will I die? I must write about this. To me, if a child is obsessed with life and death, there's some type of influence. A pretty rational explanation for a child constantly thinking of this is, okay, well, they were raised in the church and there's heaven and hell. Okay, there we go. Life and death, good and bad, good and evil, blah, 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 blah. Maybe this kid was just really into it. But this is what I thought was really interesting. I generally put my opinions at the end, but I'm going to insert my thoughts on it here while also telling you exactly what happened. Here are some details from Chad's childhood. 1, when he was in 4th grade, he wrote a novel, and it was called The Murder of Dr. J. and his assistant. This story was about somebody younger killing an older man. His teacher said that it was a fun but gruesome story, and they praised his creativity. So from an early age, and I mean 4th grade, Chad was writing stories about killing older men. In his memoir, which Chad actually has a memoir, by the way, he talks about this one story. And it's a story where he was so mad at the world one day that he started killing bees. Here's a quote from his book. I spotted another one, then another one. I got a strange satisfaction from it. I kept count. And after half an hour, I had killed 120 bees. But he said he stopped when he heard a voice. And this voice whispers and shouts instructions in his ear. Sometimes very specific militaristic instructions, commands, and he calls it the voice. Okay, I'm not going to insert too much of my opinion here. I'm going to take those facts and hand them to you, and I want you to tell me what you think. Chad grew up in the church ever since he was a little boy, and from a young age, he started writing stories about killing older men, and then he starts killing animals. I'm sorry, a bee is essentially, if you are killing bees and you're killing 120 bees, you basically are killing animals. That is an animal killer trait, okay? So my question is, what is Chad so mad about, and what happened to Chad Daybell? Once again, this story as a whole, we are talking about child killers. They are people that killed children. That is what Lori and Chad are. But my job here is to dig into the past and figure out what makes a child killer. And so I leave the ball in your court on that. Personally, I think something happened to Chad that he never dealt with, and everyone either minimized or told him it didn't happen, and he created a lot of internalized anger and rage, and that is who he is. So through school, after the 4th grade, Chad writes more and more stories, and he ends up getting compliments on a regular basis about his writing. So he goes to school for journalism. While he's attending Brigham Young University, he ends up meeting his wife, Tammy. Tammy, named Tammy Douglas, they said that she caught his eye immediately. Bro, Tammy is a little cutie, a little baddie, okay? There's actually quite a few pictures of them when they were younger. And Chad, you know what? Chad actually looked like he was quite enamored with Tammy, and she was definitely in love with him. In her younger pictures and then her most up-to-date pictures, there was one trait about Tammy that is always consistent and very adorable, and it's her smile. She had this very cute, like, just very sweet. I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost like her whole personality was right there in that smile. And I've seen people like this before, and Tammy was one of them. She just looks like she's Miss Fix It. Let's do it. Let's put a smile on her face. Let's go. She just has this really sweet energy in every single one of her photos. Chad and Tammy were actually perfect for each other because not only were they studious and religious, but also they both had a little bit of a dark side. After graduating, Chad went on his mission. Afterwards, he came home and he got a job as a graveyard digger and a cemetery sexton, which basically means he runs the cemetery. He went on a religious mission with his church, and then right afterwards came home and started working in a graveyard. This is okay, but there's a darkness to it. If a girl that you know has been alt for most of her life, and then she has to go on this trip with her church when she's 18, and she comes back and works in a graveyard, weirdly normal, I get it. But for Chad Daybell, a guy who was like, I'm religious, I'm a religious man, I'm reporting to the church, him getting a job in a graveyard is a little dark. And Tammy actually worked a job in the parks department, and she would deliver burial reports to the graveyard. So Chad and Tammy were a husband and wife couple that were working together in the graveyard. I think that is just so interesting for people with these strong religious backgrounds. Like, sure, the church needs a gravedigger, but he won't doing this for the church. He went to a cemetery and wanted to be around dead people. To wrap all of this up in a bow, if you're thinking, okay, they worked in a cemetery together, who cares? Or, oh, she was working in another department that just had to deliver stuff to the cemetery, who cares? You're reading too much into it. Okay, well, get this. They took their engagement photos in the cemetery. These two liked a little bit of darkness, and Chad certainly did. But they continue on to live a normal life, and they end up having 5 children. Tammy is kind of a stay-at-home mom and a homemaker, but she eventually gets a job as a computer teacher. She was very forward-thinking, very, very smart, and just very connected to kids. I mean, shit, she's got 5 of her own. Chad, who has always been a writer, wants to continue to pursue that passion, and Tammy helps him out. They end up forming the Spring Creek Book Company, and now, with their newly formed publishing company, Chad hits the gas on his books. Do you remember when I said earlier that when Lori got this podcast, this form of media, her delusions blossomed because it was an echo chamber? Well, Chad was always in his room writing apocalyptic religious novels, but now he's a published author and he's getting praise for it. He is now getting praise for his delusions. Now, he's a religious writer, but his main focus is not just on religion. It's actually on preparing for the end of days. His books were loosely based on the Church of Latter-day Saints, but his friend Morgan said, quote, Chad had this belief that some people who were on this earth weren't really the people they were supposed to be. They were zombies, and their souls had left them. Chad thought that evilness took over people's bodies, and the only way to release their spirits to heaven was to kill the bodies. Later, when asked about his books, Chad Daybell said, and I quote, I don't fictionalize any of the events portrayed in my books. I'm not really that creative. My torn veil allows information to be downloaded into my brain from the other side. A couple of things here. I don't think Chad is as delusional as Lori. I think he's a bit delusional, and I think he's pretty grandiose. The line, my torn veil allows information to be downloaded into my brain from the other side, implies that he thinks that he's special, he thinks he's superior. It's also pretty narcissistic, pretty grandiose. I would like to just point out that Lori doesn't really have a history of thinking God is transmitting messages to her. She's looking for the messages from God. But Chad is so egotistical and self-important that he believes he is the savior. He is the one receiving the messages. It is him. He is special. So they're both fairly delusional, but there's a difference in it. I hope this makes sense. He was not a successful writer, but he was a niche writer. And in October of 2018, he was invited as a speaker and an author to the Preparing a People's Conference. And that is where he met Lori Vallow, right there when he was on stage. These two do not waste any time. They immediately go into full affair mode. Also, mind you, I think this is probably a full-blown limerent affair. If you haven't heard of that before, it's two people in a state of limerence that become obsessed with each other. It can be very intense. It can be very emotional. There's a sense of longing there. And you don't have to have any type of mental diagnosis to be in a state of limerence. You don't have to have any type of personality disorder, no anything. Anybody can experience a state of limerence when there is a limiting situation and an object that they want on the other side. Longing is a very, very, very intense emotion, especially when the object of your desire is right in front of you, but there's a couple of invisible barriers. And that's what this affair felt like for the two of them. They loved being in each other's company. It was exciting. Every time they hung out, there was dopamine hit after dopamine hit after dopamine hit, whether they were talking on the phone, whether they were messaging each other, whether they were seeing each other in person. But here's the thing. They're not really talking about how much they like each other first. They're not talking about that at all because they can't. It would be sinful. Instead, they're talking about religious concepts. But their religious concepts are not based in just religion. They are not talking about the scripture. They're talking about their version of the scripture. And so what is this? Now that we've gone through both of their backgrounds, Lori's version of the scripture is she's a traumatized person that uses a lot of new age language, loves new age stuff, loves the spiritual demon shit. Give me all you got. Unload your full God clip into me. I'm fucking here for it. Gimme, gimme, gimme. And then Chad's form of scripture delusion is homicide and the end of the world, okay? They are not talking about the Bible, but they're pretending like they're talking about the Bible and flirting. I don't know if I've explained this well enough that you guys can like see what was happening here, but I have watched hours of documentaries about this. I've watched so many hours of like their interviews, how they speak, their past life, their everything. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to just straight up say it. These were two horny people that were really into each other and they wanted to fuck, but they couldn't talk about it. So they were just constantly talking about God. This happens later in the relationship, but I just need to tell it to you now so that you know where I'm at. Here's an example from the research of things that they would say that make me think they're just horny for each other, okay? This information came from Melanie Gibb, who was Lori's best friend. She told everything to, and Melanie ratted her out later because she was not Christ-like, even though this was her podcast host. Chad and Lori both believed in reincarnation, and Chad told her one time that he had lived 31 previous lives on different planets, and Lori had lived 21 separate lives, 5 of which coincided with his life and experience on Earth. Bro, that's his way of saying we were married in another life. I think we were married in another life. Have you ever really liked someone before and thought, I think I knew you in another life, or I think I was with you in another life? That is not some spiritual religious shit. That is something we say to a dude we really like when we're 17, okay? And that's what they were saying to each other. They are saying crush level stuff to each other and then wrapping it up into religion. But they are not secretive about this. In fact, they can't hold it in. And this is a very emotional thing that they are just so obsessed with each other to the point that Melanie, the best friend, steps in and she actually suggested to Lori and Chad that they needed to divorce their spouses because their connection was too intense. Not that Melanie felt like they needed to be together and this was the right thing. She was like, you guys are cheating and I cannot watch this. So if you guys really want to be together, then you guys need to divorce your spouses. That's what Melanie was saying. Melanie told the press later on that Lori believed that she and Chad were sealed due to their past lives. And it didn't matter that both of their spouses were alive. They were meant to be. He is really telling her crush stuff under the guise of spirituality. And Lori loves spirituality. Chad also told Lori that she was not allowed to talk about any of their private conversations because this was information that he was receiving from beyond the veil. God, please tell me somebody sees what I see and we're on the same page about this. Wrapping crush stuff and romantic stuff into the guise of spirituality, and we're feeding it to a woman that wants nothing more than the love of a man and the love of God. I also kind of think that Chad realized all of this stuff was working and this hot woman is eating it up and coming closer and closer to him. Like, this is feeding into his ego. This is feeding into her delusions. This is truly, genuinely, truly a match made in hell. The fact that these two people met is so strange, so unique, and so should have never happened. So 4 months after Lori meets Chad, things start to get very dark. Lori and Chad start to do what they call energy work to get rid of people's evil spirits. Lori would tell Melanie later that she firmly believed that the only way to get rid of a zombie or a spiritual demon, somebody that's controlled by an evil spirit, is to destroy the person's body. I believe that Lori fully believed this, and I think that Chad fully manipulated her. But don't get me wrong, Lori is no saint here because remember, her roots are in being religious and being a good servant. And here she is having an affair. That doesn't have anything to do with her delusions. So there is a part of me that really feels like Chad manipulated Lori using spirituality, but the lack of morals for Lori were always there. Now, do you want to know how fast all of this was moving? The Preparing a People conference was in the beginning of October. And on October 30th at 11 a.m., Chad Daybell sent this email to Lori. The email says, "Here are the family history documents you requested." Next, there's a title, and it says, family history information. When I hear the words family history information, I'm thinking genealogy report. I'm thinking something legit, something real, something that's based on familial DNA, something, right? History implies factual. Information implies factual. What he sends are the light and dark spirit ratings for different people and how they're measured. So the email starts with him explaining how people are measured on a light and dark scale. For example, he says, most LDS members are a level 2. Most bishops and ward leaders are a level 3. Most stake presidents and general authorities are a 4. The apostles are a 5. A few level 6. The dark side can only match the light numbers, not exceed them, and there's not a whole lot of 5s on Earth right now. It limits the dark's power. So he's presenting one of the most fucking insane things I've ever seen in my life to a woman that's like super, super delusional. So he sends off like kind of a guide to how to read this. And then next, he sends ratings, light and dark ratings for Lori's family. First person listed is Alex Cox, her brother. Lori's light rating is a 4.3, even though he told her there's not many 5s on Earth. He's inflating her ego by rating her a 4.3 in the light. Her past husband was a 2L. Oh, her second husband, he was a 2D. He was dark. And then also, Chad Daybell has taken the liberty to give lightness and darkness ratings to Lori's children. Lori's first son, Colby, gets a 3L light rating, above the average Latter-day Saint. And then Tylee Ryan, her second child, her biological daughter, gets a 4.1 on the dark scale. This man that Lori trusts and believes has just told her that her daughter is evil. And not only that, but according to this scale, she is so evil that she may never come to light. This is pretty scary for Lori. Now, there's a few other people on this list, but another one that's really interesting is JJ Vallow, her adopted son. He receives a 4.2 light rating. Within less than 30 days of meeting, Chad Daybell is grading her family and her soon-to-be missing children, and she's not batting an eye. So this is the moment that I'm going to tell you to completely take your empathy cap off for Lori, if you ever had one, which, by the way, I know some of y'all ain't never had one. Y'all said, child killer, it's send her to the grave, you know? Which, totally, I'm there with you. I'm just trying to do my job here on Sinister. So I'm reminding you, if you have felt like Lori was a mentally ill woman that was taken advantage of up until this point, I'm right there with you. But this is the moment that my empathy cap is completely coming off and it's going in the garbage, because ain't no man that I done known for a couple weeks gonna tell me my daughter's bad. You ain't gonna tell me anything about my family and my children and what I should do with them. So this is the moment that Lori, for me, has gone from human to bad, bad mom, and soon child killer. And I will not stop calling Lori Vallow a child killer, because that's what she is. Just a heads up, guys, we normally do not have 3 sponsors on a video, but this week our production line got a little bit messed up. So one more, but thank God it's a good one. Look, you guys already know, if you've been watching Sinister for a while, I love ZocDoc, okay? I tell you guys all the time about how I've used it in my daily life, how it saved me so much time, and honestly, stress. Now, look, last week, some of you guys know I've had some like medical issues with my skin, and the other day I saw this mole that had to go, and my doctor couldn't get me in, and I am not kidding you guys. I booked an appointment on ZocDoc, and the next day I had this mole removed. Hold on, I gotta get up close on this. Yep. We're not playing around, and neither is ZocDoc. Listen, if you don't know what it is, it's an app or a website, however you want to use it, where you can find 5-star doctors in your area that take your insurance within a reasonable time frame. And the best part is, you don't even have to pick up the phone. You can book your appointments all within the app. You can find appointments weeks out, next week, sometimes even in 48 or 72 hours. And if you're lucky, or you're like, in a high population area like LA, you can get a next day. Here's the best part. After I made this appointment and had this doctor take care of me, they became my new dermatologist. I'm not kidding. I found my most recent dermatologist off of ZocDoc. I am so, so happy to have them as a sponsor, and I'm also happy to share it with you guys, because I really genuinely believe this is the future. No more picking up the phone. Do you take my insurance? Here's my code, blah, 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 blah. Nope. You just type it all in on the app. And I think this is something we've all needed for a long time. Take care of yourself, take care of your health, and try ZocDoc. And don't forget, you guys can help us out a little bit, because ZocDoc is free, but if you use our code ZocDoc.com/sinister, let them know where you came from. Once again, it's ZocDoc.com/sinister, a sponsor that I literally am using week over week. This spiritual work, this energy work, this affair, to be blunt, went on from October all the way until January, when Charles Vallow, Lori's current husband, started to feel unsafe. Her religious delusions had gone absolutely haywire. I mean, think about it. She's still doing the weekly podcast. Now it's been going on for even longer. She has just got back from the Preparing a People's Conference back in the fall. And now, unbeknownst to Charles, the craziest man that anyone has ever met is whispering in his wife's ear. And honestly, all the people said, oh, they were never having an affair. They never did anything. Shut up. Shut up. Allegedly. Do I have to say? I have to say allegedly because this wasn't in the court documents. They were fucking. These people were fucking. These people, spiritual demons, y'all was having a spiritual affair. Like, y'all really were. And pretending to talk about some Jesus, talking about some God, whatever, and then locking lips right afterwards. Lori's delusion brain is absolutely juiced up. And her husband, Charles, rightfully so, is scared. Lori has been calling herself a god lately. Chad probably told her that she was some queen that should be on his arm. She's a god, he's a god, da-da-da-da. And Lori's believing it. She has gone from being a faithful servant to now she believes that she is a god. And she is also receiving messages from beyond the veil. Not like Chad does, but she does receive a few. She also starts to accuse her husband, Charles Vallow, that she has been married to for almost 20 years, of being a man named Nick Schneider and threatened to kill him. She said that he wasn't really Charles. He was actually Nick Schneider trying to trick her, and she would kill him, and he wasn't going to get away with this. Charles is scared. He calls the police. He tries to get an order of protection for himself as well as for JJ. He's worried about JJ. He's worried about Tylee. And, his body cam footage when he first called Lori is online. And he looks incredibly concerned. This woman that he's loved for many years and thought that he knew is starting to change. And unbeknownst to him, it's because of this very strong outside influence. On the day that Lori is supposed to be served the order of protection, she disappears. She is nowhere to be found. She's never able to be served. This is another moment that we really throw away our empathy cap for Lori because she knew this order of protection was coming because of her own actions and she ran from it. Do with that what you will. Charles is so scared that he actually pulls JJ out of school. He was at a place called the Life Academy in Gilbert, Arizona, and he actually was getting special treatment for his autism, and this was a really important school because this place finally worked for him. That he did not want to take him out of the school, but kind of felt like he had to for safety. And then he ends up moving them to Houston, Texas. But not too long after, he moves back to Arizona because Lori reaches out and they reconcile. The reconciliation doesn't last for long because in July of 2019, Charles goes to pick up JJ from Lori. Remember, they both adopted to him. Like, they both have custody. And while this is happening, Charles gets into a fight with Lori's brother, Alex, and then suddenly, Charles ends up dead. There's also a body cam video of this, too. It's very, very strange, and one of the strongest pieces of evidence in how far gone Lori was. Lori goes out to talk to the police, and they ask her what happened. She sits there, arms folded, kind of just mouth off to the side, sunglasses on, looking bothered by the police asking about the death of her husband. She just looks like this is an inconvenience to her. I believe that this happened because Lori believes everything that Chad has told her. She believes that what she's doing is righteous. She believes that this is what God wants and these humans being confused doesn't matter. So we get this really nasty attitude from her, but eventually the police choke out what happened. And supposedly, Charles, who's literally never done anything wrong, came to pick up JJ and something happened and he attacked Lori. He came after her and then her brother had to come out and shoot him. They claim it was self-defense and a brother was just protecting his little sister from her evil husband. And they actually walk in and see Charles's body on the ground. He is dead. He has been shot multiple times. They call it as self-defense. And very quickly, over the next couple of weeks, the case is closed. But on that same day, Lori does a couple of strange things. One, she doesn't tell anybody for hours. She also didn't call the police for quite a while. She goes to JJ's school to pick him up and tells everyone that Charles has just killed himself. That's what she says. That's what she tells people. Right after they have killed them, she goes and tells people that Yeah, he took his own life. After Charles's death in July of 2019, things began to move very, very quickly. And everything really happens in August, because in August of 2019, Lori decided to relocate to a new home that just happened to be a lot closer to Chad Daybell. Then, on August 9th, 2019, Lori Vallow put JJ's fully trained service dog, Bailey, on sale for $2,500. Just a few days after Lori sent the email saying that JJ would not be returning for the school year, on September 8th, 2019, Lori, JJ, Tylee, and her brother Alex decide to take a trip to Yellowstone Park. No one knows exactly what happened on this Yellowstone trip, but I'm not going to leave this up to mystery. It's suspected later that Alex is basically the hitman for Lori Vallow, and that evidence will come up a little bit more later. It was presented through the evidence that Lori and Chad manipulated Alex, Lori's older brother, into killing people for them because they were never going to do it themselves. So, keeping that in mind, information that came from the trial later, on this date, September 8th, 2019, Lori, her brother, and the two children go to Yellowstone Park. After this, only Lori, JJ, and Alex come back home. Tylee, the daughter, is nowhere to be found. Lori will never say what happened on that day. Alex, the brother, will never say what happened on that day. But what we do know is just a few months later, Tylee's body was found in Chad Daybell's backyard. They killed her that day. Nobody knows how. We really don't know why. But what horrifies me is that if they killed this child at Yellowstone Park, as the prosecution argues, then that means that JJ was still alive and they took Tylee's body and put it in the car with the boy and they drove her back. That's what that would mean. So a lot of times when people talk about the Lori Vallow story, they do the part where they say, and then they went to Yellowstone Park and Tylee never came back, and months later she was found in the backyard. I want you to know, like, what happened on this day. They killed the child and put her back in the car so that she could be buried at Chad's house while JJ was still probably in the car. So now it has been less than a year since Lori and Chad have met, and Lori's husband is dead, and now Tylee is dead. Nobody can find her, but you and I know, because I'm telling you this story now that the case is pretty much closed. Tylee is dead, and you're not going to believe what happens in October. And guess what? Neither did Tammy Daybell. On October 9th, 2019, Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife, calls 911 and reports that a man dressed in black clothing and a ski mask shot at her multiple times. That was on October 9th, 2019. That same person came back again, and this time, Tammy died. Exactly 10 days after Tammy reported an initial shooting and threat on her life, she was found dead in her home. The report said that she died peacefully in her sleep of natural causes. For some reason, maybe per the spouse's request, an autopsy was never performed. I find it very strange that an autopsy was never performed on a healthy 49-year-old woman who dies in her own home. Another weird thing that happens in the month of October. Lori ends up getting very close to her niece. Her niece's name is Melanie. Keep in mind, this is different than her best friend named Melanie. This is Melanie with just an I, not an I-E. I know, I told you, if I use all the names, it gets very confusing. So I'll reference her as the niece. Lori ends up getting very, very close with her niece. And, you know, her niece is kind of leaning on her like, oh, cool, older auntie. But like, then she starts to realize that her aunt is like a little weird and pretty religious and also a little delusional. But the reason why her niece was leaning on her was because her relationship was ending. Her niece was going through a very serious divorce. She was married to this guy named Brandon. They had a bad falling out. Brandon was very close to people in the Latter-day Saint church. He actually was even the person that baptized Tylee into the LDS when she was 8 years old. So Lori is getting close with her niece, and her niece is divorcing this guy who was pretty close in the community. Well, this is so strange. When the niece starts venting about her ex-husband to Lori, somebody shows up and tries to kill the ex-husband. Lori told her that he had a pretty high dark energy rating, and next thing you know, somebody shot him when he was leaving home from the gym. The bullet shattered his window and missed his head by a couple of inches. But oh my God, something actually happened before October. It just kind of has had a huge question mark. JJ Vallow is nowhere to be seen. Remember, nobody has seen Tylee since early September when they went to Yellowstone. She is, as we know now, she's dead. Then, in early September, Lori emailed saying that JJ wouldn't be coming back to school and then sold his service dog for $2,500, by the way. And then he ends up missing in September as well. JJ would also later be found in Chad Daybell's backyard. So let me be super, super clear. These two met in October of 2018. By October of 2019, 4 people were dead. Charles Vallow, Lori Vallow's husband, Tylee, Lori's daughter, JJ, Lori's son, and Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife. After all of this darkness, we finally get a little bit of good news in November 2019 because Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, who are both now widowed, decide to get married in beautiful Hawaii. What's interesting is this place in Hawaii was a very special place to Lori. It's a place that she used to go when she was a child. It's kind of like a safe space or a happy place for her. And she decided to share that with this man that she had known for just about a year. They didn't decide to just get married in this place. They were going to set up shop for a little bit. Chad sent an email to a realtor before they even got there that says, would the owners be interested in leasing this property to a clean couple with no pets or children? Mind you, the news, the church, the family and friends, they do not know that JJ and Tylee are now deceased. At this point, November 2019, the children are just missing. What I've told you is what kind of happens later when the bodies are discovered, but I'm telling you this story from the point of view of a timeline. They get married in 2019, and nobody knows where the children are. All they see are Lori and Chad smiling on the beach, taking engagement photos. Now, they were married on November 5th, 2019. Tammy Daybell was murdered October 19th, 2019. They got married just 2 weeks after Chad's wife died. And 3 weeks prior to Tammy's death, Lori Vallow bought her own wedding ring off of Amazon, which can actually be seen in the photos. Not only did Lori buy her own wedding ring, but she bought it 3 weeks before Chad's wife was murdered. Now, the pastor is not the only person at this wedding handing out blessings. Chad is also handing out blessings. Why is that? Because Chad has an ego and he thinks that he has some kind of spiritual gifts of the highest order. And I need you to picture this. Lori and Chad sitting on a beach in marital bliss with their leis and looking spiritual and powerful like they had accomplished something. Okay, that's the scene. This is what Chad said to Alex, Lori's brother. He said, Alex had assisted him in ways that can, quote, never be repaid. Chad then called Alex a prophet and a hero and predicted that he would have a future as the messenger of the Lord. Chad is manipulating people using spirituality. So in this case, he is literally telling Alex, thank you so much for doing that really bad thing. I can literally never repay you, but I will call in a favor to God and ask him to make you a messenger, a spiritual messenger, and make you important. Okay, cool. Like as though Chad has that type of fucking power, but he's preying on Lori's spirituality and also Alex's spirituality. I mean, Alex isn't as delusional as Lori, but he is her brother, and he was also up in that church 5 days a week in the morning. God is very important to them, and Chad is saying that he is a spiritual figure that is connected directly to God, and they are listening because they are lost. Also, I don't know if I told you this, there's so many details in this case, and I try to keep it to what helps you follow in the story. But look, this is a big one too. Chad Daybell arranged Alex's marriage. Alex was married to this woman for not very long, but Chad actually picked Alex's wife. He said, yes, I think this woman will serve you. And guess who Chad picked? A woman that worshiped him. So Chad hooked up Lori's brother, aka his hitman, with a woman that worshiped Chad. So, this is so complicated. Okay. So anyways, while Chad is on the beach spewing this bullshit to Lori's brother, Guess who's back home calling the police? The kid's grandma, Lori's mom. Remember I told you about her, Janice, the super religious lady that likes to look nice? Well, the children have been missing for a very long time now. And so finally, the grandma calls the police and says, I can't find Lori's children and she won't tell me where they are. She won't tell me anything. The police, the first thing they're going to do is call up Lori and say like, hey, where are your kids? Lori, the first thing she does is she calls up Melanie, best friend from the podcast, and she asked Melanie to lie and say that she had JJ. And Melanie, a little delusional herself because she was on the Preparing the People pod, you know, she's a little out there, but she's not a liar and she's not going to lie about missing children. So she doesn't, and she's not going to. The police demand that Lori Vallow produces her children that have been missing for months. And when she can't, the authorities go to arrest her, and Lori and Chad go on the run. In November of 2019, Lori and Chad go on the run, and authorities immediately go to her apartment and execute a search warrant. They discover that she and Chad have just gone somewhere in Idaho. They start talking to people, and this is when Melanie, bestie from the podcast, she starts spilling every crazy thing that Lori has said in the past couple weeks. She's telling the police that Lori had told friends that her children were zombies. The only way to free their soul from evil spirits was to kill them. She was here's another issue that I have with the religion not wanting to believe in mental health. Lori was talking to people about killing their children, but because she was talking about it through a spiritual lens and people in religion are scared of mental illness, they didn't do anything. The only person that did something was Charles Vallow. He tried to divorce Lori. He tried to file the protective order. He moved the children out of state to get away with her because he took her delusions seriously. And while Lori sat here telling other people that she was going to kill the children, nobody fucking did anything. Now, November 2019, the police are looking for Tylee and JJ Vallow. Lori and Chad have gone on the run, and now they are looking through her house for more information to find out where they are. But another thing is they're starting to not believe that Tammy Daybell died peacefully in her sleep. So they exhume the body, and the autopsy finds that she did not die of natural causes. She was asphyxiated. When Alex, Lori's big brother, finds out that they have exhumed the body and they have a proper autopsy, he starts to panic. Remember I said that he was married to one of Chad's loyal followers? It was a woman named Zaluma. And Zaluma starts to ask questions after she finds out through the town that Tammy Daybell was actually also murdered. So Zaluma also thinks this is sketchy, but she asked Alex, like, hey, can you tell me, like, what's going on with Lori and Chad? Like, you're always over there. You're always talking to them. Like, everyone's dying. Tell me something. And Alex tells her, like, I can't tell you anything. He kind of just locks up. He actually is getting extremely stressed, extremely worried. But he did tell Zaluma, quote, I think I'm being their fall guy. And she said, fall guy for what? What have you done that you would be the fall guy? And she said, I kept pressuring him because he wasn't answering me. Alex is just losing his mind, spinning his wheels, not communicating with his wife. Granted, this is his new wife and it's an arranged marriage. But he's kind of spinning his wheels and he's like, I think I'm the fall guy. I think I'm the fall guy. I think I'm the fall guy. And then boom, in December of 2019, Alex also ends up dead. 1 month later, January 2020, as you guys may know, something interesting is coming, the pandemic. But also, the police have been looking for the children since November of last year. It has been over 2 months, okay? 60 days for missing children? No, the police are not playing around anymore, and they demand that Lori Vallow show her children. She's claiming that they're still alive. She's claiming they're still fine. And the police say, you need to produce the children right now. And she doesn't. So finally, Lori has violated a court order. Lori's oldest son, Colby, has been mostly staying out of things. He's talking with family. He's worried about the kids, but he really trusts his mom. He also doesn't really understand why all of this is happening. Also, I'm not inferring this. He speaks very, very, very candidly in the Netflix documentary. And he also had an entire YouTube channel dedicated to his thoughts here. Because in January of 2020, Cody starts putting out these YouTube videos to his mom where he is begging her to show the children, come home. Where are they? Nobody in Lori's family believes that the children could have passed, even though that's what a lot of people in the community think, because they feel like they know Lori really well and she could have never have done this. Even months after the children were just gone, Lori's mom still went on like TV interviews saying Lori would have never done this. This never happened. This never, ever, ever would. We don't know where the kids are, but we want to see them and we know they're fine. That's basically what they went out there and said. In one of the videos, Cody pleads with her saying, Mom, this can end. This is not okay. This is not cool. Even if you just show them on FaceTime, just show them on FaceTime to the police, it would be a lot better. I know that you have a good heart, so I know it's time to do the right thing. This is like all really strange. Like, her family really did 100% believe that Lori did not have the capacity to do anything like this. And they thought that she just wasn't showing them for some reason. So they were like, please, please, just show the children. Now, the family may not believe that anything has happened to the children, but the police know a murder case when they see one, and they are all in on it. By February 2020, Lori Vallow-Daybell had been arrested. And by May of 2020, Lori and Chad were officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. These charges were for the children, and Chad and Lori were told, we're going to assume that you killed them, and we will charge you with murder if you do not produce the children. And they didn't, therefore, they were charged with murder. However, Chad was also charged with the murder of Tammy Daybell, and then Lori was charged with conspiracy to murder for Charles Vallow. And then 1 month later, JJ and Tylee's bodies were officially found. JJ's body had been found in a tightly wrapped piece of black plastic that was covered in duct tape. These two went through insane lengths to cover it up. They put him under the topsoil, under a patch of grass, under 3 large flat rocks, and then under the rocks there was wood paneling and then a layer of plastic. And underneath all of that was Lori Vallow's son. For Tylee, when they were looking for her body, they found the body of a cat and they found the body of a dog. It was a pet cemetery. And then they found a melted bucket and then half of a human skull. As they continued to dig, they found other body parts because Tylee, after her trip at Yellowstone Park, had been dismembered. Tylee's story is exceptionally sad because none of her friends ever got an explanation or an ending for months. Tylee's friends thought that she just stopped talking to them. They didn't know that she had been dismembered by her mother and she was dead. They thought the friendship was over. Now, I've given you a few of my opinions here and there, but I promise you these are supported by different pieces of evidence throughout the trial. I've just had to insert it throughout the story so that you and I are on the same page. Okay, remember when I said Lori was a severely mentally ill woman, extremely delusional and deep in religious fanaticism? The courts ruled that she was incompetent to stand trial based on her mental health. Guys, criminal defense attorneys dream of having them, of like courts accepting their client's mentally ill plea. It never happens. Carly Gregg, she shot her mother and then tried to kill her dad, and they were like, no, she can stand trial. God, I could name 1,000 cases where people are like, no, I'm very, very sick. Like, I can't stand trial. And the courts are like, you're fucking fine. Get in there. With Lori, no. They talked to her and she was gone. Just completely in the world of delusion. She actually was told she could not go to trial yet because she was not okay. She needed to be medicated. She needed to be talked out of these delusions. Like, she was severely mentally ill. And I mean, Chad just made it 80 times worse. Now, as for Chad, he was not only competent to stand for trial, but in August 2021, the court said, let's give him the death penalty. Chad's crimes are so severe that he was up for the death penalty. The media hits and they pull out every salacious thing that they possibly can. Evil mom, doomsday work, spiritual demons, preparing a people, all this stuff. And also, Chad actually had a couple people that were following him around. I mean, it was like a mini cult, but Chad was just not very charismatic. He was just a delusional writer. He told his followers that the world was going to end on July 22nd, 2020. This is how I know that Chad was a horrible cult leader, because that date is way too soon, okay? Like, it was too soon. But you know what? You know what's crazy about this? You all know what was happening in February 2020. The pandemic. Lori was in jail, getting arrested February, March, or whatever, and then the pandemic hits, and what pisses me off so much is, she was like, it's happening. It's beginning. She was in her jail cell counting down the days until her baby daddy prophecy was going to come true. July 22nd, 2020. That bothers me so much. That's probably why they couldn't stabilize her either, because she thought this date was coming. July 22nd, 2020. The media and the defense start to argue that it is actually a serious case of manipulation and possibly even brainwashing. Chad used what he learned from previously being in a cult and took advantage of Lori's overly religious nature. Personally, I can see a combination of the two because Chad was an egotistical weirdo who had fantasies about homicide. That's what all of his books were. They were religious death fantasies. Then Lori, who not only has a strong history of delusions, was just desperate for a man's love. Again. The trial for Lori and Chad started in April of 2023, and a laundry list of crucial information came out. One, there was an aspect of financial gain. Chad and Lori stood to gain significant amounts of money from the death of their spouses, over $1 million. Secondly, Lori Vallow's older brother, Alex, who is now deceased, his cell phone pinged in the back of Chad Daybell's backyard for 2 hours on the day that Tylee disappeared after the Yellowstone trip. Just a little bit after Alex's phone pinged to that area, Chad sent a text message to Tammy and said, I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery. He was writing an excuse for why Alex was in the backyard, but also it pinged his cell phone and placed him at the scene of the crime, making it obvious that he was also involved in Tylee's murder. The lead prosecutor on this case was a guy named Rob Wood, and he stated this beautifully. He said that Lori set a plan for the children's murder in motion on October 2018, the day that she met Chad Daybell. She used money, power, and sex, while she and her husband used religion to manipulate others. The trial lasted for 6 weeks, and the jury deliberated for 4 hours on Thursday, for 2 hours on Friday, and afterwards, they found Lori Vallow guilty of killing JJ and Tylee, as well as conspiring to murder Tammy, Chad's wife. The verdict was live streamed, and Lori was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Afterwards, at her sentencing, she gave the most insane, rambling statements, saying something such as she claimed to have access to heaven and the spirit world. She said that JJ, Tylee, and Tammy were, quote, busy in the spirit world. She also said, Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered in this case. Accidental deaths happen. Suicides happen. Fatal side effects from medications happen. And the judge's response, he threw the whole book at her. He said, no, you guys are full of shit. Tammy's murder was important because you wanted to get full access to Chad. You guys wanted to get married. Also, Tammy's life insurance policy was worth $500,000. You guys were going to take the money and run with it. Also, the prosecution proved that Lori and Chad would receive the children's Social Security and survivor benefits. Chad, however, who was up for the death penalty just a few months ago as I am recording this episode, June 1st, 2024, Chad was sentenced to death upon the recommendation of the jury. They convicted him of first-degree murder and conspiracy charges in the killing of his first wife and 2 children of his second wife. When Chad was sentenced, he just sat there with the dumbest look on his face. I really believe that this guy was a weirdo that wanted to kill people, but he was raised religious, so he didn't know what to do. Like, he is somebody that has murderous, violent fantasies, and that is everything that's written in his book. The prosecutor was right. This actually is a story about God, money, sex, and really power. The power that Chad had over Lori, the power that Lori had over her brother, the power of religion. I mean, that is everything in this story. But none of those things were supposed to exist because we're talking about religion. Religion's not supposed to have money, power, sex, none of that. But that's everything this story was. The religious part was never the important part. The religious part was the cover-up. This was a very, very murderous affair.
Jesus came to me, and he has several times since I've been in jail, but he came to me 20 days before I was arrested, and he said this, Lori, there is a purpose for your whole life. And I knew I hadn't hurt anybody. I knew I never would hurt anybody.
I can't sit here and pretend like this isn't what it is. And I hate all of it.
This is my mission, and my mission will be revealed to everybody at some point, and including you. And at that time, I just want you to know, I'm not going to say I told you so. I'm just going to say I love you.